Welcome to Game Day with Heavy Cardboard, where we teach, talk, and discuss and play medium and heavy strategy board games, war games, 18xx. And today is the most anticipated game we've ever had on this show, and the most intimidating game that we've had on this show so far. I am, of course, talking about the 2014 Golden Elephant Award winner, Arkwright, designed by Stefan Riesthaus, published originally by Spielworks, now by Capstone Games. So yeah, this is going to be a big one, y'all. So thanks everybody for joining us both live around the world as well as after the fact, joined by a cast of characters, most of which you know, some of which you do not. So I'm your host, as y'all know, Edward Euler.
I am the co-host of Heavy Cardboard and his wife, Amanda Euler.
Oh, Matt, resident tech guy and resident.
Yeah, resident.
Yeah?
Michael Brandt, new local patron.
Yeah, all right, cool. So yeah, Michael's new to the group, and he was voluntold that he's going to be playing this today. So it's Michael's first game, so this is actually going to be an interesting way to run through with the teaching and everything. Amanda has played this countless number of times, none recently. Matt, same?
About 2 or 3, a couple of times with Dana.
Okay.
Get destroyed most every time.
Right, you know, as is standard in that. Oh, you took second in those.
Yes, I did. In a two-player game, I was absolutely second.
All right, so before we get started, a couple of notes. We do have the Meeple Realty insert, although I'll be honest, you guys really aren't going to be able to see it because of the way we have the camera set up today. We have removed most of the things out of the insert just to make it easy for explaining as much as easy can be. The other thing that I want to quantify or qualify here is I'm going to do this teaching as if it's a standalone teach. So I am going to go over pretty much everything. There might be a few edge cases here or there that I might not touch on, but for the most part, if you are familiar with this game, we'll see you in about 45 minutes. If you're not familiar with this game, it's going to be a really involved, this is going to be the most in-depth teach I've ever done on this show. So just know that going in. I'm going to have the cameras down, the player cameras, as well as the chat down during the teach, because I need to be able to focus. Everybody here, especially Michael, needs to be able to focus. And if you're not familiar with the game and you're just watching this video to learn how to play the game, I don't want the chat distracting you, because this is a big boy. This is we're playing Waterframe, of course, so this is the whole kit and caboodle. Also, a couple other notes before we get started. As soon as the teach is over, we're going to take about a 2-minute intermission. The reason being, Amanda and I are going to swap spots. The reason being, I'm not playing today. The reason for that is because it's such a big game and because we have a new player in the game. I want to be able to just kind of GM or run the game and not have to worry about trying to think about my moves as well. That might be one step past what I'm comfortable doing. I think you guys will benefit from it, as well as us locally will benefit from that. So we're playing a 3-player game. So about a 2-minute intermission after the teach. And then at some point, whenever we get to a good stopping point, because this is going to be a longer playthrough, we may be taking another 10-minute intermission as well. If you're watching this after the fact, we're going to actually edit those out after the fact, so you won't see them. So just be aware of that. Anything else I missed?
I think that's all.
I don't think so. Everybody's confused because Matt and I are
in wrong spots. Yeah, sorry about that.
Sorry.
So tell me about it. I'm going to be over there, which is for the first time. That's going to be really weird to me. So all right, so enough stalling. Let's get through my 12 pages of outline, ready to teach this puppy. All right, y'all ready?
Yeah.
Let's go.
All right, here we go. All right. Arkwright. It's a game where we play wealthy business folk at the turn of the 18th century during the Industrial Revolution. We're going to be issuing shares of our stock portfolio to invest in different factories to sell and ship goods, with the end result of becoming the wealthiest investor at the end of the game. The game is going to take place over 5 decades or rounds, with each round having the same 4 cycles in one event phase. Each cycle corresponds to one type of good and the manufacturing of that good. So we have food, we may call it bread. We have clothes, we may call it shirts. We have cutlery or silverware, and then we have lamps or luxury goods. After manufacturing the goods, players will sell those goods domestically and or possibly overseas to English colonies via contracts, with the goal being to make as much money as possible and then to invest in your own company shares and raise the value of those shares and to have the most lucrative portfolio at the end of the game. So before we get into the main teach, let's go ahead and talk about what you guys are looking at here. So on the outside over on the left and at the top and the right there, you have the share track, share value track. Then you have the different rounds and decades. We have the economy markers for each good type here, which these will be revealed as we get to them. We have the events as well as the end of game event, which says it's the end of the game. There's the market share table, which tracks the appeal of each of the company's goods that'll be out here. So we have one for bread, we have one for shirts, we have silverware, and we have the appeal for lamps. We have the available worker pool here. The wages for the workers. We have the unemployed, you're the weakest link, you're fired, pool down here. We have the administration chart, which is kind of our action selection area of the board. And then we have the special markers mat and development tiles, which is going to be over here. Now over on the player tableau, everybody has a player tableau that looks like this. It just might not be laid out as pretty. So
No,
we
it
have,
is. I made sure.
Okay. So we have the factory mat over here. Each player can have up to one type of factory for each good. So everybody will have possibly one bread factory, which will be placed over like so. They may have a shirt factory, they may have a silverware factory, or a lamp factory. Each factory can have 4 different lines of goods or 4 different lines of production. So if this line is used, it will produce a certain amount of goods. If these 2 lines are employed, it will produce even more goods, so on and so forth. Workers and machines will go into these locations through here, and you can see some have 2, some have 3 spots available for workers and machines. You have the price indicator track, which tells how much you're selling an individual good for. Obviously, I'm going to go in more depth as we go along on these. You have the action markers, which select the different actions that you want to take. So at the beginning of the game, each player starts with 6 of these action markers in their own player color, and they may acquire more as we go along. There are distribution and quality markers as well. There's the warehouse and harbor, as well as the contract markers and the contracts that may be employed to be able to ship overseas. So during the 1760 decade, this entire decade is all just seeding the board or setting up the game between all 3 players. So we'll actually start 2 factories per player, and then we will get money or divest shares for money to be able to pay for those factories, so on and so forth, before the game even starts. So the game is going to be seeded asymmetrically by player choice at the beginning. So now we go into gameplay. So we have the round track. So this marker will go along to track the different phases of each round. So once we have set up everybody's individual tableaus and we have the game seeded to start, we're going to start in 1770, and the very first thing that happens, I'm getting ahead of myself. A game round consists of a decade, 1770 for example, with a decade consisting of the same 4 cycles. You have the bread cycle, you have the shirt cycle, the silverware cycle, the lamp cycle. They all operate in the exact same steps, there are 3 phases to each cycle. I know this is a lot of, it's really, really simple once you get started. 5 rounds, 4 cycles. Within each cycle, there's 3 steps. Think of it that way, all right? So the 3 phases or steps within each phase here, there's the economy phase, which is flip this over and do what it says. So the importers in the job market are adjusted. Then there's the action phase, where each player conducts a single action, which we will be putting our markers down here and doing an action. Then there is the production phase, which the production phase is going to be determined on if you have a factory in that specific phase. And then you're going to produce, sell, and make money. Hopefully, maybe lose money. Only one type of good is active in each cycle. The bread factories will only be active during the bread cycle. Nothing else will be producing, nothing else will be active. So during the shirt cycle, only shirts, not bread, not silverware, so on and so forth. This means that at the end of each specific cycle, that type of factory is going to be the only one that produces, and all players that have factories of the particular good, i.e. if I have a bread factory, then at the end of the bread cycle, I'll produce bread. Maybe Michael doesn't have a bread factory, he doesn't produce. It's that simple, okay? So let's start out phase 1, the economy phase. So we flip this over, and I did this. This is what the actual one will be. The marker, we flip this over. The neutral importer for bread will move up that many spots. So we will move up 1 on the track, and then we will bring that many fired workers back into the active worker pool. So we will literally take 3 of these, place them over at the top of that from right to left. That's simple. That's the economy phase. We do that every time for each of those. Simple, easy enough. Let's move on. The action phase. And this one is going to be the most extensive on the teach. All right. So players are going to choose an action marker to place out here on the administration chart. So this tells you what, or this says what actions you want to take. You pay the administrative fee depending on the location on this chart. There are 8 different possible actions and additional actions at the bottom of each marker. So taking a look only at these 6 yellow markers right here, there are 2 different types. There are, well, I should say there are 6 different types, but there are 2 different additional actions at the bottom of it. There is the little square right here, which says that you can take a special marker. More on this later, just bringing it to your attention. The other one is at the bottom, there is these little arrows with the pound sign. I'm probably going to use American money as far as my thinking, so I'm going to call them dollars. Just know that they're pounds British sterling. So this is that you can adjust factory pricing. More on all these later, just wanted to bring it to your attention at this point. So as I said, there are 8 available actions. Everybody starts with 6 of them available, and then there can be additional ones, ships out here, and there are production ones. In this case, there is only 1 single production one available. So those are the 8 different types. I'm going to now go over them in detail because this is really, really important to be able to follow. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the factory. So the factory action. So Amanda playing yellow, or I'll use myself as the example. I'm yellow. I'm going to only play in the yellow track right here. So when I take the factory action, this allows building, modernization, and upgrading of factories. You need factories to produce goods, which then you sell to make money. That is the crux of the game. You have to have factories. Everybody is going to start the game with 2 factories, but if you wish to expand or modernize your factories, or possibly shut down factories, you need to take this action. So this allows the current development level, which it dictates what factories you can build. So over here, you see that during the first round, or the first decade of the game, first round, you can only build level 1 factories. Then in the second and third, you can build level 2 factories, level 3 factories. However, you notice that for all of these, there are 4-level factories. There is a way to be able to build a 4th level. We'll get to that later. But at the beginning, you only have the 1st level factory available to build. When you build it, when you choose to build it, you obviously can only have one bread factory. You only have one bread factory track. You can't turn the others into bread factories. One bread factory.
You can't sell your shares like in an 18xx game.
Right. So, you, you build or start at the current level and you gain one production row of workers. So, let's start with how you do this. There are administrative prices out here, which are the same on either side just for ease of use. So, where you price the factory does not matter. So, let's save some money. We will pay $2 to the bank. We're going to use poker chips for this. You pay $2, which is the administrative cost for the factory before you get started. So you owe $2. Then you come over and maybe at the beginning of the game, I have 2 factories out here, but let's say one of them is not bread. I wish to start a bread factory. The cost to do so, it has to be a level 1. Again, going back to this, says I can only build a level 1 factory. The cost to build this factory is £8 British sterling, or $8. Okay? So when I do that, I now have to set the price for what am I going to sell my goods at. The most that I can sell a good for is $8. Okay? So this here, this marker, is what I'm setting the price for. This is the price indicator track. So if I set this at 8, that's fine. However, now we need to talk about setting appeal. Well, we're talking about the bread track here. This is your appeal track. How appealing is your good to the public? So if, and just for example's sake, if I set my price at 8, my appeal is at 0, it's not very appealing. So if I wish, maybe I set it at 6. So now what's the difference? 8 minus 6 is 2. My appeal is set at 2. It's that simple. Does that make sense? The why of this will come apparent down the road, okay? All right. Later on, you may, let's say we're now into the 2nd decade, and maybe you want to modernize that factory. So you wish to take this action again. You can take one action per actual phase. So you'll take one action in the bread factory, or during the bread phase, you'll take one during shirts, one during, so on and so forth. So you're taking 4 turns or 20 turns total throughout the whole game. If it's the next round, we're here in the second, in the 2nd decade, it's now my turn. Hey, I'm gonna modernize my factories now. I should also note that you can build multiple factories in one action. You would just have to pay the cost. So here, earlier, when I built this, I could have also built a shirt factory in addition to that, okay? But now that we're available to build the 2nd level, I have to pay the full price. So I would have to pay $10 plus the 2 administrative, so it would be $12. And then when I do it, I set the price just like what I did. But now the base, you'll notice, has gone up from 8 to 10. So now if I keep this at 6, my appeal actually jumps up to 4. That makes sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Quick question. Can
Sure.
you build a new factory you don't already have and modernize?
You can, in fact, it actually is beneficial, and I'm glad you asked that. So if we are in the 2nd one, I modernize this one, so I throw away the 1st level. I'm not in shirts, and I say, hey, I want to go ahead and get into shirts. I don't actually have to pay the 1st and the 2nd level. I can just go ahead and skip straight to the 2nd level, because that's the modern age. That's the cost of the current age. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So then I would pay $11 for that, and then I would set, and maybe I set my my price at 8, and when I do so, I then set this. The difference from 11 to 8 is 3, and there we go. Cool. That makes sense.
Cool.
And you can also do multiple levels if later on it's possible that I have my original bread factory. Let's say I have done a poor job of keeping up with the Joneses, and I am now allowed a third level factory. If that's the case, my level 1 bread factory, I do have to then pay $10 and then $12 to make it to the third because it's already an existing factory. Does that make sense? If it were a new factory, i.e. I don't have silverware, I can just skip straight to the third level. Whereas if it's an existing, I have to actually pay through to get up to it. That's the modernization.
Got it.
Okay?
It's the price you pay for decrepitude.
There, exactly, right? All right. Also, when you do this, as I said, you're going to hire workers. Hiring workers for the first is free for now. So when you hire workers, you take the first line's worth. So top to bottom, left to right. So I would take this one and this worker. Do this very gingerly to not knock them over. And when I started that factory, I then manned the first line for the factory. Okay, so boom, this will now produce whatever that first number is on the factory, which in this case is a 2. However, if you're not sure what that is, the top row of these numbers down here tell you what each factory does. So it's factory level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the first line will always produce 2 bread when we get into production. And that's factories. Any questions on that?
No?
Okay, cool. All right. So now let's go ahead and talk about workers. So the worker action right here. Oh, and I guess I should point out also that when you take the factory action, you can adjust the price freely for any factory that you messed with, that you actually was affected by the action. So if, again, going back to where we're in the first level here, and if I built 2 factories in this case, so at the beginning I built those 2 factories, I can adjust the prices because I messed with those 2 factories. Those were affected. If I had subsequent factories in which I did not touch with the factory action, I can still adjust the prices on those if I had those factories, but I have to pay £1 British sterling per factory that I want to adjust the price for. Cool? Cool. All right, so now talking about workers. This one, really, really simple. So workers, you can hire and fire as many workers as you want. So during the first phase, I went ahead and put out a couple factories, let's say. Then here we are into the second round. We do whatever that is underneath there. I don't want to reveal it. So then I place the worker tile out there. Where can I place it? Well, I can't place it in the 2 because that's taken. I can place it in any other that I wish. Let's say, okay, we'll try and be frugal. I'll place it at the 4. I pay the 4 administrative cost, and then I can hire and fire as many workers as I wish. Again, top to bottom, left to right, and I don't have to pay for them yet. We'll get into that down the road.
Can workers be reassigned, or would you have to fire and then hire new workers?
You cannot reassign within the factories themselves. So for instance, I have, let's say I only have my bread factory from the beginning of the game. At the beginning of the game, you will man 2. We'll get into that later. But on this, let's say that I want to be able to, let me do one more here. I'm adjusting my player board before you guys come back here. So at the beginning of the game, I have my 2 factories manned, but I choose to, let's go ahead and add more lines to the factories. So I decide, looking at this, you know what, I'm going to bring in 5 more workers. So that's 1, 2, 3, graceful, 4, 5. Thank you. Mm-hmm. All right, so with these 5 workers, I say I want to go ahead and put them out here, and I'm going to go ahead and man that line as well. Boom. That's hiring workers. Pretty simple. If instead of hiring these 2, I said, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and fire these 2, they would go down to the fired worker area. No harm, no foul. Okay, but obviously they will produce less when that factory produces. That makes sense? All right. If any worker, if this is empty, that's rare, but it might happen. If this were empty, you can hire from the fired worker area, but that's the only time in which you can do so. Okay? In addition to that, when I hired workers, maybe I didn't want to add them to the lines over here, or maybe I just wanted to add to that line. I have my warehouse over on the left-hand side. You can see that there are spots for one worker, okay, above for rows and columns. This in the Waterframe edition of this game, you must have a manned warehouse to store any goods that you produce above and beyond what you sell. So if I hire a worker here, he will allow me to store 5 bread. If I hire another worker here, that would allow me to store 5 silverware. Okay, easy enough? But they actually stack. So if, when I hired and I put one over here, this allows me to store 5 bread this way, and this guy allows me to store 3 additional of every good coming across this way. So in this case, I would be able to store 8 bread, 3 shirts, 3 silverware, and 3 lamps. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So the other thing to note about warehouse workers is they're there. They're like luggage. They hang around forever, and you will end up paying for them as well down the road. Okay? Yeah, cool. Easy enough. That's workers.
Prices.
Oh, we'll get to that later. Yep. All right, so that's the worker action. Next is machinery. Okay, workers, manpower is expensive because, like what Matt was alluding to, you're going to eventually have to pay for each worker. However, machine automating is cheaper. So to automate, you then do the machine action. Very simple here. So you place this. This one's a little bit different than these. These two do not have prices on them. This one does have a price on it. When you choose where to place it as far as your administrative level, you must equal or exceed those values to get 1, 2, or 3 machines. Now, you'll notice there are additional ones that you can get that are more
Machine-based?
or more efficient
Yes.
and cheaper to be able to go. But at the beginning, you only have this one. So I have used these 2 spots. So if I want to use another, so if I place it here at the $6 I have to pay the $6. I would then get 2 machines because pretty self-explanatory. The $13 level one, you'll notice this only goes up to 10. And that comes into these special tiles, which we'll get into here in a little bit, okay? Only available if you have that special tile. So the machinery, it reduces the cost that each time a factory operates due to a cheaper automation. So in this case, 2 machines. So Amanda, if you would hand me 2 machines.
2 machines?
So I would pay £6, get 2 machines. Then on your player board, you'll see that some of these places only manned workers, only workers can go there. Some are manned workers or machines. So at any point, you can just be like, you know what, you're fired, you 2. So those 2 get fired, you replace them with machines, and then you put them down into the fired worker area. Pretty simple, cool. The nice thing about the machines, they only pay it's only $1 as opposed to the actual market cost for workers. So, yeah, at the end of the worker and the machine action, you'll see that little square. You can take a special marker. So now is a good time to go ahead and talk about these special markers that are over here. The current decade, so we're in 1770, says what you're allowed, which row you're allowed to take from. So at the beginning, you're only allowed to take from the top row. In addition to the top row, you're allowed to take these special, and these are all rule breakers that everybody may get. And you're allowed a maximum of 4 of these rule breakers total. These out here are just more efficient, as well as the ships and the special production that I mentioned earlier. These are just more efficient uses of tiles that you already have, okay? As I mentioned, you're allowed 4 of those special tiles as well. And if you ever take a 5th tile, then you have to replace one of the 4 and put it back, okay? Cool? All right, so next we're going to talk about quality. Quality is important when you're producing goods, for the most part, you would think. The quality right here with a thumb up is a permanent increase in quality or the base price of a good for that factory. It's based on the price or the price where you place it, just like for the machines. So you'll notice that this one says $6 and $12 for the base one. So if I place it at the $6 value or higher, I would get 1 bump in quality. If I were to place it at the $12, again, the $12 being only if you get that special tile that allows you to use that, you then would get 2 bumps. So again, here we are, we're in the 4th round. Well, I only have 2 options here. I pay $8, but I only get the $6 value of this. I don't get a rebate because you pay the administrative cost. To do that, I would get 1 bump in quality. So now let's go back to the tableau to show you how that works. So everybody has 4 quality markers right here, and these range from 1 to 4 on that side, and there's a 5 and 6 on that side. The 5, 6, again, only pertains to a special tile over here. So I'm allowed 1 quality bump because I paid the $6, which allows me 1 bump. So I get 1 bump. So you notice you have a spot for all your factories, and right now I have a bread factory and a silverware factory. Well, I go ahead, I say I'm going to bump the quality of my bread factory. To do so, what does that mean? Well, my base price just went from 8 to 9, which, okay, I'm at 9 minus 5. Now we have to go out here and mess with our appeal from 3 to 4. Does that make sense? That's an automatic thing that happens every time. In addition to that, you'll notice that it has the adjust price marker at the bottom. Well, okay, maybe I don't want my appeal that high because I don't like only making $5 a piece for my bread. This is better bread than that. It's good quality. Let's jack the price up. So I'm allowed to adjust the price on this. So when I do, maybe I set it at 7. So 8 plus 1 is 9 minus 7. Now our appeal, the net, is 2. Cool?
Yep.
All right, that's quality. It's a permanent bump to that. Okay? If on a subsequent turn I would replay the quality again, and I pay again, I would have to pay 6 because I did poor planning here, whatever. Then at that point, this 1 could either go to a 2 as a permanent bump. Now my base price is 10, so on and so forth. Or I could add to my silverware factory. If I had 2 bumps, I could do 2 to 1 factory. I could do 1 and 1. I can disperse it however I wish. Cool? All right? Good deal. So that is quality. That's quality. So now, next, going into distribution. Distribution is the exact same thing as quality, except it's temporary. Think of it as a barker or advertising, right? Advertising fades. That's why you have to stay up on advertising. Ask Reddit. So with distribution, it's a temporary increase in quality, and it works very, very similar to quality. So you notice this one says a max of 4. So if, let's say, I had those out of there, and on a turn I say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and place it out here. I have to pay the 6 administrative costs just like everything else. And in addition to that, I am only allowed to spend $4 worth of advertising. Even though I paid 6, it's a max of 4. Over here, you'll notice there's a max of 7 and a max of $10 in advertising. Okay, all right. So how does this work? All right, so I'm allowed to spend a max of $4. Well, these, just like quality, are distribution. So for every bump, it is face value on that bump. So to go from 0 to 1 is 1. So if I decide, you know what, I'm going to go ahead, I can spend $4 worth. So 0 to 1 is 1. 1 to 2 is 2 more. That's a total of $3 worth. Then I go ahead and bump that one because that's $4 worth. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. If I were to do that on a subsequent turn, and this is where it was going into it, to go from 2 to 3 would cost
1.
3.
3.
It's always face value on the number you're turning to, and I'll walk through that to reiterate that. So that would be $4. To go from 0 on both those, 0 to 1 is 1, 0 to 2 is 1, plus 2 for 3 plus the 1. Make sense? Is that
Yeah.
clear? Clear as mud?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's clear. It's just going to be
Pay for
confusing
each
later.
step.
Okay, all right. Well, as we go through the playthrough, that should help. So again, these are temporary, but what did they do? They added to the base on both of these. So now I went from 8 and 9. Now I'm up to 10 on my bread. And now my silverware went from 10, 11 to 13. Okay, cool. So that 13, and I'm set, if I set this at 5, that now jumps that up to
6.
8.
8.
Math.
I can't
I
add.
know. No worries. So my appeal on my silverware would be 8, and for my bread, which is currently at 10 minus 7, my appeal went up 1. Cool? So that's distribution. Why this matters, we are getting there, I promise.
I will say that I've played this game many, many times, and this is the first time that this is clicking for me.
Okay, all right. Well,
First
good.
time.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad to hear that, all right? And with that, because it has the adjust prices, maybe I don't want my appeal this high, I want to make more money, goes back, I can jack with this and mess with my appeal out here, right? Same thing, cool. So the last action that I'm going to talk about right now is the last one that we have here, which is the stock market or the stock exchange. And I'm going to briefly cover this one because it's going to get lost in minutia for right now. So the stock exchange allows you to purchase and sell shares, which is the goal of the game, as well as repay loans. You really screwed up if you got loans. Sell goods from your warehouse if you have any, and select contracts. And these contracts are going to be extremely lucrative ways to be able to sell to foreign markets. Okay? So, to be able to take this action, so I place it out here in an available area, I pay the administrative cost, and I can do any of those things. So, first and foremost, how can I purchase shares? Well, this is the first time we're going to talk about the share track. So the value here, you pay whatever face value is for those shares. So if I have $40 extra, I can buy up to 4 shares if I wish. Okay? I don't have to spend that much, but I can. I also can sell shares at face value, i.e. wherever your marker is. So if my marker is up here, I can buy and sell at 12 a piece. Okay? And again, the end of the game, the goal of the game is as many shares as you have times the share price. That's your final score. Okay? Selling goods from the warehouse. Briefly going to touch on this. If you have any goods in your warehouse, you can sell them. The amount that you sell them for is this number here in the corner, which is it has nothing to do with your factories. It has only to do with the base price, which is $2, $3, $4, and $5 respectively. And last but not least, selecting contracts. I'm going to touch more on contracts. Just know that you have contracts that you can ship overseas to sell extremely lucrative contracts to. Okay? The last 2 actions that are available are ships as well as production. We're going to cover those later, though. So now let's get into the production phase. And this is the crux of the game, but also the most confusing part of the game. All right? So during production, you're going to produce the indicated good. So if we are in the bread phase, everybody that has a bread factory will produce bread. Okay? Then we're going to sell goods according to our appeal, our appeal track, and I'm going to set this like so, just to seed it. Then we're going to have to pay for our workers. Then we're going to have to pay for our machines. We'll adjust our share prices and then mess with other stuff on our distribution, etc., etc. So let's get into how production works. So first and foremost, everyone has to verify, is your appeal correct? So how do we factor appeal? 8 plus 1 plus 1, our base number is 10. Minus, what's our price? At 7. So our appeal should be at 3. Our appeal is at 3. Good to go. Everybody else, let's just assume they're right. Okay? So the active factory type for each player produces goods. Okay, so let's go back and look at how many goods my factory produces. So I have 2 lines that are going to produce here. So I'm going to produce a total of 3 goods. 2 for the first line, 1 for the second. There's also these numbers up here, so 2 for the first line, 1 for the second. So I'm going to produce 3 goods. All right, cool. So I'm producing 3 goods, 3 bread. Everybody else, let's say for argument's sake, is also producing 3 goods. Okay, so now we have to figure out demand. So demand is the available workers. So I'm going to over-explain and really emphasize how this works. So there is a demand of total of 6 bread. The workforce is what dictates. Obviously, if we were in the shirts, it would be 5, then 3 for the silverware, so on and so forth. But we're only talking about bread right now. So everybody has 2 lines, and they all produce 3 goods each. So there's 9 goods getting produced. There's only a demand for 6. Who gets to sell? Well, now is what we have this. It's actually from Vinos. So we're going to start here. So first and foremost, demand is dictated by appeal. So the most appealing gets sold, or they get to fulfill that demand first. So yellow in this case gets the first one here. So we'll just put that there. That is fulfilled. Now we drop it down to the next. Well, which is the most appealing? Yellow still is the most appealing, so yellow gets to sell a second one. But now we encounter red, so red now gets to sell 1. Cool? Then we keep dropping down. Which is the most appealing? Yellow. He's allowed to sell 3, so there's 3 there. However, now we go to red. I'm just trying to get it off the number. There we go. Red can sell a second one. And now we have a tie between the game, right, the neutral investor, and green. Neutral investor is always the last one to get paid. So in this case, green gets to sell the last one. And there you go. Now, yellow gets to sell 3, red gets to sell 2, green gets to sell 1, but they've produced extra. Well, we'll start here with another example as well to make sure that this is also clear. Your appeal is the max number that you're allowed to sell, regardless of demand. So even if demand were all the way at 20, if yellow's appeal is only at 3, and yellow actually produces 6, he still can only sell 3. He's only allowed to sell what his appeal is. Okay, does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so if the example were like so, just set this back up. And again, I really want to drive this point home because this is the crux of the game right here. So again, starting over, yellow would sell the first one because they're the most appealing. Then yellow will sell the second one. Then yellow will sell the third one. And then red and green are tied. If there is a tie in this case, whichever is the most appealing, which they're tied, then the importer, as I said, goes last, then the higher quality, so whichever has higher quality. But in this case, there's plenty of demand to be met here. So yellow or green and red each would get 1, and then the game would take 1 as well. So in this case, yellow gets to sell 3, red and green each can only sell 1 each, even though they produce more. Because demand is met, but even if demand wasn't, their appeal is only at 1, so they can only sell 1. Cool? All right, so yay, yellow. Yellow gets to sell 3. So now we come over to yellow's tableau. How much do they make? Well, yellow is at 7, sold 3 of them. It's 21 bucks. Awesome, congratulations. So I would get $21. However, now I have to pay for my factory, or pay for my workers that are in here. Well, what is the current market for workers? Current market, as long as we haven't dipped down into the 3, is only $2 a piece. Okay, so we look, I have 2, 4, and then $1 for each machine, 5, $6. 21 for these, minus 6, $15. Cool. Easy enough? All right. But let's say instead I'm red. Red only gets to sell one of these. So red would sell for whatever their price is. Let's say it's $7. Minus 2, 4, 5, 6. Hey, they still finished in the black. They make a buck. That's cool. But out of that one they sold, they still have 2 left over. What are they supposed to do with these 2? Well, they have 2 options. They either, if they have a manned warehouse of bread, they can store these over there. I'm allowed to store 8, remember, in that case, right? Because of the way I have it manned. Or if I have a contract that I had gotten from the stock exchange earlier, knowing that I had adjusted my appeal down to where only going to sell 1 domestically, but I'm going to produce 3, I know I'm going to have 2 left over. Oh, that's awesome. Well, if on one of the previous actions I had gotten one of these handy dandy ships, I can now ship to fulfill this contract. So to be able to fulfill this contract, you have to have a contract, obviously, set at whatever amount that you want, however many goods you think you're going to be able to fulfill. You have to have capacity of your ships to be able to fulfill those contracts. It's a contract of 2. It's a 2 capacity ship. We're good to go there. Cool. And I have to have the leftover goods to be able to fulfill it. I do. So win. So even if I didn't have a manned warehouse, and going back to this, I had these 2 left over, me being red. So I get to sell these. I don't have to put them in a warehouse. I don't have to have a manned warehouse. They just automatically get loaded up on the ship and shipped out. Well, how much do I make for these? So this doesn't matter, and this doesn't matter. It's just your base price of your factory, period. It's pure unadulterated profit. So it's $8 a piece. No crew, no nothing, no machines. It's $8 a piece. So it's $16 plus the 1 that I sold domestically. Oh, cool. Make sense? So that's how contracts. Once a contract is fulfilled, it's fulfilled, cool. I bump it off of here. Then I drop the value of my shares. And you might be thinking, whoa, whoa, whoa. Why does my share value drop? Shipping's risky back then. Investors got nervous. So for every ship that you used, this drops in value. That makes sense?
Yep.
Cool? All right. I also should point out that you can use multiple ships. So if I had a contract set at 8, I could use a 6 and a 2. And if, in that case, these ships would come with a crew of 2 that are shown on there. And those stay forever as long as you have that ship. You're limited to 2 ships here. If you ever want to replace a ship, you can. It must be with a higher value ship. Okay? However, when bread produced, I have this contract, and I only had 2 leftover bread. I didn't have 8, and my contract's 8. That was really poor planning. What happens then? That jumps up automatically. If I don't fulfill my contract at that point, then my share price is going to drop 2 if it pings off the top over here. It will drop 2 every time that I do not fulfill this contract. I only have to fulfill the contract every time bread produces because it's a bread contract. Does that make sense? So once I have fulfilled it, it comes off my contract queue. Okay? So if I had fulfilled this one that was 2, it just drops off. I fulfilled it. I got my money. We're good. And next time that I take a stock exchange action, I can claim more contracts. You can have 1 contract of each type, and you can have them at whatever value you want. And the contract comes due at the end of when you produce for that. So the bread contract will be whenever we produce bread, shirts, silverware, and lamps, respectively. Make sense?
So the excuse me, the dropping 2 is 2 spaces along this track.
Exactly.
Not 2
Correct.
pounds.
Yep, that's exactly it. Yep. So if in this case here, being at 13, I would drop to 11. I wouldn't drop from 12 to 10. Exactly. Okay. All right. So that is selling. That is producing, selling, and everything else. Well, now, whenever we sell domestically, the good news is our share price is going to get adjusted. So now let's go back to the example earlier. Yellow sold 3, red and green each sold 1, right? If you sold 1 good, your share price goes up 1. Cool. So red, green, and yellow all go up 1. Okay. Did somebody sell 2? Yes, yellow did. Awesome. So yellow gets to bump up a second one if you've sold 2. Okay. Green and yellow also would have had they sold 2. Then your share increases once for the highest appeal. Yellow's the highest appeal. Goes up even 1 more. If you're tied, nothing's the highest. You're tied, so nothing happens. Then who sold the most? Yellow. So yellow goes up again. So it's possible to go up 4 bumps if you were the most appealing, sold the most, and sold at least 2. So your share price goes up, which is awesome because your portfolio is worth more. But now it's also more expensive to buy your shares when you take that stock market or stock exchange action. Cool? All right. So that pretty much is the production phase. Do you have any questions on that? For the most part. Again, we have to pay for our workers for the factory that produced. And then, last but not least, distribution diminishes. This is advertising. Remember, these were temporary. So for that factory that produced, it drops 1 in distribution. In this case, from 1 to 0, it just comes off the board and goes there. But what happened? That went from 9, 7, my appeal just dropped. So my appeal will go down as well, automatically, at the end of every production. Anybody that has distribution. But remember, quality is permanent, so quality just stays there. Good?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Oh, I do have one production question.
Sure, please.
Hope I didn't miss this, but if you don't have a manned warehouse and you don't have any contracts and you produce excess...
No. Okay, if I did not have that 2 contract being red, red produced 3, but they only sold 1 in this case. So that's a good question. I did not touch on that. So if I do not have a manned warehouse and I do not have a contract in which to fulfill, so I sold this one domestically for $7. So I have these 2 extra I produced as red. I can't store them. I don't have any way to get rid of these. They just go away. You lost them.
Just go to waste.
Yep. So in other words, plan better. All right, so that's production. The last thing that's going to happen at the end of each of these phases is the first player marker, the waterframe, passes to the next player, and then they become the first player for the next phase. So if I started as the first player of bread, then Michael would be the first player for shirts, and then Matt would be the first player of silverware, then back to me, I would be the first player for lamps. Okay? Cool? We're almost done, believe it or not. So now, when we get to the end of the lamps phase, what happens? We have an event. So first things first, all our action markers come back home. So these would clear. So now you can reset and be able to place these wherever you want. And then we're going to reveal whatever this event is. It's a global event. It will affect everybody equally. Some are positive, some are negative. Leave it at that. We don't know what they are. One of the bottom 3, though, is what's called bureaucracy. You'll notice that these are shaded a little bit. We have little markers because that means these are no longer available to be chosen from that moment forward. Okay? So we reveal the event. We do whatever it says. Then we change start player at the end of the year. This one's a little bit different. We look at everybody's share value times the number of shares that they have in hand. So your portfolio, whoever has the weakest portfolio, if there's a tie, then we look at who has the fewest money in hand. They choose who's the start player for the next decade. Okay? Last but not least here, we go into obsolescence. Once we hit 1790, right here, it's possible that we may still have level 1 factories. If we have level 1 factories, your factories are now obsolete. So what happens in that case? Well, we take 2 fired workers, bring them over, and they just hang out on your factory. And actually, I would have to take 2 more.
Factory's so run down, you get vagrants.
Well, actually, these guys are QA. They have to artificially keep the quality from failing. So basically, they're just going to cost you more money. If at any point, though, you take the factory action and you bring it to where it's no longer in the 1, so you bring it up to a 2, it's still not current, but it's no longer decrepit, then these guys will automatically go back, you're fired, and they will go back out here to the fired worker area. That makes sense?
Yep.
Okay. So there is emergency selling of shares and loans. Basically what it is, you're always allowed to do whatever it is you want to do out here, even if you don't have the cash on hand. If that's the case, you can sell the bare minimum number of shares that you have to be able to do what it is that you're trying to do. When you do so, the face value you would get, so $11 if you're red or green in this case, the share value drops per share. This is where that changes what I told you earlier when the share price drops. The first number is how many drops it drops. And what I mean by that is, if I'm here, it's dropping 2, the first value. So 1, 2. That makes sense? Okay. If you have no shares, you're out of the game anyway. Essentially, you're so far behind at this point, but you are allowed to take loans. Loans are $10 a piece. You would put shares out here to signify that you have loans. I've never seen it happen. Don't be that person. All right. End of the game happens when, wait for it, end of the game event.
What?
All right. I know it's crazy. Any player with a loan is not allowed to win. They couldn't have won anyways, I hope. Then any outstanding contracts that you have. So if you have any contracts on your board here that has not been fulfilled, those are going to drop your share value as many spaces as that was. If it's a 6 contract, it's dropping 6 spaces. Okay? And then there is one other little side thing about making workers obscure I'm not going to go into. Most valuable portfolio wins. Highest share value, or share value times the number of shares that you have, wins the game. Cash means nothing except tiebreaker. And I'm done.
You want to show them what the shares look like?
Yeah. So the shares here, we haven't talked to because we're going to actually go over those when the game begins. Everybody has a maximum of 30 shares available here. So they come in 1s and 5s. It's going to be a total of 30 shares. Everyone is going to start the game with 15 and no money. So they're going to have to divest those shares to pay for their initial factories, as well as to have money on hand to be able to do things. So that's it. That was really long, and I'm sorry, but I don't know of another way of teaching that quicker.
There isn't.
Not to be able to give all the information all at once. So yes, Jeff, that was still the teach. It's now done though.